Welcome everybody to our second of our three offerings for Lent this season, this year, as we explore actively how to prepare for Jesus. Tonight, we are excited to have the Reverend Dr. Chris Davies, who is the Executive Minister for Programs and Initiatives for the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ. Say that 10 times fast. Chris oversees programmatic operations of the conference and is responsible for stewarding the leadership of the faith formation, justice, and outdoor ministry teams, as well as the Center for Transformational Leadership. And she's also the director of Project Proclaim. So some of you may have seen some connection with that through Pathways and administers the conference's annual meetings. Previously, Chris has served on the UCC National Ministries staff and as a local church pastor. Chris is a lifelong UCCer who grew up in Connecticut and attended Smith College for her undergrad and then Andover Newton Theological School for both her Masters of Divinity and Doctor of Ministry, where she focused on queering proclamation. She is a queer femme theologian, an urban beekeeper, I love that, an author, and a creative networker of communities. Chris and her spouse live in southern New England with an amazing 4-year-old who might just make an appearance on screen somewhere along the way if we're lucky. So, Chris, welcome to the Southeast Conference and for being with us this evening as we jump into exploring your writing and the team writing that was part of this great work about organization. And I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Look, it's good to be here, and I'm really glad that each of you are choosing to watch this recording. Because I think that this is one of the most critical things that we can do as Christians in 2026 is kind of return to the roots of who we are and whose we are, and put that into action through how we show up in our communities. So I'm going to start by reading a little bit of the chapter, just kind of the introduction of me in my context, because as I'll say as we go on, context is everything. Um, and While in my bio it says urban beekeeper, I'm back to being a more rural beekeeper now because I live in a town, it's got the smells of spring in the town, if you know what I mean. And so the farm across the street is demonstrating the time. Um, so, so when I was asked, this is an excerpt, a couple of excerpts from Building Up a New World. Here, I'll show you my fancy screen, y'all. As part of actively preparing for Jesus, Lent in SECUCC. So, Building Up a New World is it's a group written book, and I have the distinct honor and kind of like strange honor of having written the chapter on rural organizing. Um, so when asked to contribute to this chapter, I didn't feel qualified to write about rural organizing. What do I know about organizing? I grew up in a town of 5,000 people, where at one point, the rumor has it, there were more cows than people, and the stoplight down by the Route 44 with the mobile gas station was the destination on a chilly autumn night. To go anywhere, you have to hop in the car and drive for a bit to see where the streets start to shine in fluorescent light and the houses get closer together. I grew up going to church as a given, even though not everyone did. And the ones who didn't were a bit out of the norm. But at that point, I don't remember noticing the stigma that those who experienced it would now likely call formative within their own early unbelonging. I walked to high school, where I was in a class of about 60 kids, and whiteness was the unacknowledged standard. I remember now the differences that were singled out in race and class and religion. So that gives just a glimpse. And I wonder how many of you, in hearing that, echo an awareness of like, oh yeah, I know that what that kind of feels like. A town community where everybody knows everybody and everybody's parents have been there for a very long time, and it's connected to the land, the people, and the neighbors. So hold that, and I'm going to kind of move through a couple of different slides, pose questions for pondering, and you're welcome to pause the recording and ponder them as you continue in your Lenten journey where you are. So welcome to actively preparing for Jesus. Let's walk together. This is me. If you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to hear from you, Davies C, SNEUCC, and in Southern New England, which does have actually, you know what I also want to say, Southern New England community is predominantly small and rural churches. That is who we are. Um, but I'm curious for you, when someone says organizing, what comes to mind? What is real for your context? So when I grew up, the only language that I had for that was something like, um, it felt distant. It felt far away, something that wasn't really accessible to me and the cool kids did. And by the cool kids, of course, I mean like those who were on on the public front lines, those who were articulating clearly things that I didn't even have the words for. At the time, the words that I had access to were like, I want to help make the world a better place. And that was kind of my driving why about all of this, that and faith. Um, so that's a question to think through about what do you bring in when thinking about organizing? So what I'm hoping is that through the course of this presentation, you experience some accompaniment for where you are. You are the expert of your context. That means that you have an authority of your context. And that might be because you're a lay leader in a local church and you know your community in and out. It might be because you're a leader, a pastoral leader in that church and have the pastoral authority that comes with it. You know where you are and what it's like and have a sense of what your people need. I'm also hoping that throughout the course of this presentation, I'm naming intersectional analysis. And I think the most important thing we can do as folks seeking to make connections because of our own positionality is to do so through a class-based approach. That, you know, the organizing feature of poverty shows up in different ways, but it's one that we all are witnessing and we're continuing to witness as wealth continues to concentrate. And it's also been one of the singular things used to divide us from folks who are different from us from the founding of this country. I want to be clear. In the course of what I'm talking about, I am not trying to set up an us versus them. In fact, that's the opposite of what I'm trying to do. It's not about politics in terms of Dems v. Republicans. It's not about our church versus your church or church versus not church. It's about neighbor alongside neighbor. So one of the other things I want to acknowledge is about power mapping and building. Because in terms of organizing, showing up with an awareness of where does it hurt, and then who has the power, and how can we build power to help make a change. Now, this is a place where I think that congregations have an invitation to acknowledge their own power. You know, and one of the things I'm thinking about in that is about like we are able to show up because of our faith, and we have a unique perspective about what's happening as a result of that faith and what we see, what we notice within our communities. If people in the congregation are desperately lonely, that's a need. That's a place of pain that one can organize around. As a result of that, you know, one of the strategies, so like if you're stepping into organizing for the first time, the things I'm saying might have different language around them, but probably are things that are recognizable. So let's say you're coming into a new congregation as a pastoral leader and you're like, I need to understand what's happening here and how to show up for my people. The first thing you start to do is one-to-ones, you know, and asking like, what's going on here? Who helps make the decisions in this congregation? Who's got the explicit power and the implicit power. Explicit power, probably something like a board of deacons or a board. Implicit power, probably the matriarch who's been holding this congregation in an awareness of her, you know, what is to come for a long, long time, and her family is part of it and won't go against her. Bless them. But that's an implicit power, which tells you that if she's not aware of what's happening, it won't work. That same skill translates to your community. So recognizing who's here, what's going on. And it may be that there's places where those connections you can kind of leverage in order to accomplish different goals. So where is power concentrated, but where could it be are some of the questions that we bring up. I think one of the most powerful things happening, in particularly in the South, like the Southern organizers that I know are so powerful. The work that's happening is a model, frankly, for the rest of the country about how we show up for each other and how we show up for each other when it seems as if it ain't right. Um, so I'm going to say this because the work, a lot of the work of organizing that I did when I was living in Ohio was about abortion access, and that was in a red state at a red time. Now that's changed through some degree, but we were really intimately trying to do this work through a difficult time. It's through COVID, through Dobbs, through all sorts of stuff. More on that later. Pain mapping. So I've referenced this a little bit. It's about where does it hurt? What's keeping your people up at night? The odds are that what those, and that's a Reverend Tracy Blackman used to, often refers to that, like what keeps you up at night, and that's a way of acknowledging those things. One of the things in prepar when I was writing this, I was very close with an organizer called Malekte Malaku, who was doing organizing for overdose awareness and to ensure that folks weren't criminalized as a result of the as a result of drugs, in particular the fentanyl stuff that was going around. And that the campaign that she was working on um, was articulated in a way that reached one community well, but not all communities well. So the unique perspective that someone coming from a rural community might bring, like the pain or stigma or shame of drug use in your family, um, is actually something that we, first as faith leaders, can hold, name, bring love and care and like destigmatizing approaches to, but also help shape some of those narratives. People who use drugs are beloved by God. All people are beloved. So navigating the pain mapping is something that is just as important as power mapping. What's not working here, and therefore, what next? And that what next is as much the role of the leader kind of calling the shots, but almost even more importantly, coming from the people, that they if they're feeling powerlessness kind of coming alongside of your people, I'm talking about people inside the congregation specifically, is the role of a pastor, who does so often naturally because this is our call, but that's also part of organizing. So again, these skills are incredibly translatable. So, like, one of the things that I'm hoping that you'll do as you're listening to this presentation is think about what is your next right step. What is your next right step? Because you know your context. You're probably thinking about examples of where it hurts and probably have some awareness of, like, well, if we want to look at hunger as SNAP benefits are gone, then here are potential partners. And those partners might be something like, well, we've got a food bank, and I know that the community center has a food bank, and the food bank, and there's also a food bank maybe 3 towns over. But we all do it on the first Sunday of the month. There's an opportunity for relationship and conversation for some of those hypotheticals, one might say. Um, ad Additionally, the people who are those who we're seeking to serve will know that pain point better than anyone else, and are natural partners in like a what's there's relationship. I often say relationship is the currency of change. We can't do any of this if we're thinking that we've got the answers only. In fact, oftentimes we as church folk will come in later to the conversation these days. So our work becomes the relationships to kind of orient ourselves in these conversations and then move forward, which takes getting it wrong and messing up in public. So I want to name that as kind of like as you're approaching it, that's part of this and it's okay. Organizing people. So I'll go through some of this. Again, I'm going to go quite quickly, recognizing that you can pause, take a breath, use this as a teaching with your congregation. Where does it hurt? How can it help? One of the most important things about organizing is helping align the self-interest. So you can only do that through the conversation. So I need an example. What's a good example for what's going on that might be helpful to your people, Davy and Kim?
Hmm.
Um, Inability to afford housing
How's
and
it
being priced out.
priced out of housing? Oh, God help us. So if we're talking about priced out of housing, let's say that there is a community-based effort for more affordable housing. It's likely that as you begin to think through those conversations or come into conversations where folks have been having that conversation, which is more likely, there's some power mapping happening about like, here are folks who we know are going to agree with us. They're part of our base. Here are folks we don't know what they think. Here are folks that they are anti. Like they're not going to do this. We don't want, what do they call them? NIMBYs not in my backyard. I don't want that going on. So, this is a place where faith is often named as kind of like the closer in some ways, in a unique role of people of faith to come in and say things, particularly to this kind of middle place of like, well, what does our faith tell us about housing? You know, and it helps people articulate their values and then invite them into action. And there's some self-interest in that. Like you are a person of faith. You identify as a Christian. And down there you can even say, you know Jesus. You know Jesus. What does Jesus say? You know, and you like use the language that's recognizable to align self-interest. And values is one of the pathways that we uniquely can use to get there. Planning and goal setting. So this is like if you are in like a tiny like a micro town, the church is one of the biggest organizing bases there are. That like this is probably one of the places where the people come together with the most intention for anything. That's so much power. So that's kind of like coming together like, okay, we don't like what's going on here, and we're going to do something. That first acknowledgement is when people start to come together and you meet and you start letting people talk, let them get it out and start to like figure out, well, what do we do with this? And that's where you go into kind of strategic planning, setting objectives, identifying resources, and looking towards action plans. I'll tell you this though. Who else knows how to organize an event with 100 hours of volunteer labor for an hour-long event than the church? We are good at meetings. Go ahead, Kim.
No, that's a really good point.
We're good at this. We are natural organizers. We are. I mean, this is the kind of staying patience that's absent from a lot of these conversations. You know, I was talking with another friend of mine who is a wildly competent administration person. And it's like that kind of steadiness, continuity, and ongoing presence in some of these conversations is a real gap in movements right now. So I want to name that explicitly. If you're like, well, where do I fit in? I don't, if you felt like I felt like I don't know where I fit in and I don't know how to do this, but if you know how to attend a meeting, this might be an invitation into some of these other things. And then there gets to mobilization and coalition building. So inviting people, connecting them to each other in groups. And this is where I think that I will say I have gotten stuck before because I get really intimidated by people who I don't know if I'm going to show up right. So like when I said this is going to require just kind of showing up, sometimes I have to give myself the faith chat before I'm going into a space where I feel like everybody else is doing this with a lot more intention than I am. And I'm just kind of like still sparkly about all of it. I say that, which is so funny to say now because like in thinking about all of this, I've been doing this kind of organizing for um like 20 years, 25 years. And yet I still feel like I'm not there. And then finally, like communication or proclamation. I think this is critically important for us too, because this means that the kind of values proclamation we're doing is setting up communities where change is possible. Um, I'll give you here's a freebie. The more radical you are feeling called to preach, the more scared you are of saying that thing to the congregation that pays you. Like there's a power dynamic there. The more Jesus you got to pull in, the more scripture you got to pull in, the deeper you have to go into the text to ground this, because that is where our power is. We've been telling these stories for 2,000 years. There is power there that surpasses any kind of system that is rising or falling or crashing or falling apart. We got Jesus, and Jesus is going to carry us. Um, I have faith that God will carry us, that Jesus will carry us, that the Spirit will hold us through what the next 20 years may or may not hold. And I say that as one looking to, that much the entirety of my career. Oh, I got up on a what my colleague and friend Darrell calls a sneak a breach. So, organizing people. Context matters. So this is one of the core things I hope that you're hearing is that your context matters and you are the expert of your context. One of the bravest things I've had to do is claim that. I hear stories of people coming from and in particular as one who identifies as queer, I'm like, oh, they're gayer than I am, they're queerer than I am. And I'm like, oh, no, no, no. Like, I'm actually just kind of a little farm girl. Like, I didn't grow up on the farm, but it was surrounding me, and that's valid. And standing in that truth of the authenticity of who I am, where I came from, and who my people are, it's you guys, is a power too. So this is the place where, we might share where we're from, describe who lives there. For example, the small town that I grew up in, when I was growing up, there was a lot of farming in the town. Now I'd say it's more of like a bedroom community supporting the hospitals around. Now, frankly, that's a concentration piece of being in New England, that town I grew up in. Like, that's different from where you are. But towns are supported by the industries that are nearby. And one of the things that's more complex is that when there's not a choice of industry, it gets harder. And when that industry is no longer what it used to be, but the memory of what the town used to be drives everything, there's a cognitive dissonance between who we are, who we want to be, and who we can be. You know this well. Oh, the most challenging issues. Perhaps it's something like that. There isn't an industry in the town. The factory has left. That is a real issue that is often a critical issue. Beyond that, we've started to sell the land. We don't have access to the things we used to have anymore. And so who's left are the grandparents who aren't able to keep up the towns, and the children have left to find more opportunity. That's a really challenging issue. So what are some of the things that might come up in a situation like that? Okay, so probably about access to key things that are necessary, access to like getting around. That's probably an issue. Probably about getting fresh food, unless you're gardening, in which case, feel free. We all hopefully it all works. Just planted seeds here the other day, and I'm still at the place of like looking to see like what's coming up, But yeah. So all to say, whatever challenging issue is in the town, where you have the people with the idea, the energy, and the capacity to do something, you can start to organize. Even beyond that, if you have, 2 out of 3, there are potential coalitions or partnerships that can help feel where to plug in. If you've got not the energy, but yes, capacity, there's like letter writing campaigns. There's things to be done that are aligned with where you are feeling called and where you experience the pain. So what are some Christian values that your church teaches? Let's just take a minute and think about the last, we're in Lent. There's some real clear ones that come out through Lent. For the purpose of this conversation, let's think about these ones. Things that we have centuries of teachings to engage with. Love your neighbor, clothe the naked, welcome the stranger, free the prisoner, share the wealth, set the table, feed the hungry, and so much more. This is the place where we have a lot of staying power. One of the things that I've been saying recently is that in this moment, this political moment in our country, where it feels like for many, many people, it feels like things are falling apart. For other people, it feels like things are getting unveiled. For other people, even, it feels like the impacts of that are impacting, are present in their lives, even if they're not able to articulate why. I think the most powerful thing we can do as churches, particularly in tiny towns, is hold the line that loving your neighbor is worth doing. That's it. And it's so important. It is our work to carry this idea with tenacity that no matter what happens from here, our children and our children's children and our children's children have the ability to acknowledge compassion and show up for each other. I can't say that enough because it feels like in some towns we're some of the last people doing it. I don't want to lose that the work that we do as Christians in small towns, whatever language we're saying, whatever ideas we're talking about, if we are sticking to loving your neighbor is worth doing, we are doing critical organizing work and showing up for the future. So I really want you to hear that. Because one of the things that I experience in many places is this, like, I'm not good enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not getting there enough. And I think that we're apt to fold under that and do nothing. When in actuality, the things that we do because of our faith are things that there is a role for in this movement, in this ongoing, complex, intersectional movement. There is a role for us all in this movement. So I want to say a little bit more about this book. We as the church can organize. This book is kind of like, it's designed to be kind of just like an entry point. And if you're coming at it through the rural organizing chapter, that's fantastic. I mean, there are pieces in here for multiple complex intersectional ideas, and language that I learned a lot, even as I was writing and editing and engaging in this. So this is it's a way to help build relationships. Because it gives you the context of how some of these other issues are happening. I think one of the things that you can do as the conference is that you already have relationships between the cities and the rural places. That's incredibly powerful. It's often absent in larger places, but the folks who are, organizing in Atlanta and the folks who are organizing in Alabama are in relationship already for issues that are similar. So, I mean, even sharing testimonies of those relationships is demonstrating a possibility of something different, which is amazing. So here are some of the other authors in here, and I truly feel just so humbled to be beside these folk in this. Many of these people are and have been teachers for me, and it is one of the things we can collectively do is learn from each other, from the basis of our context, from the basis of our experience, because relationship is the currency of change. Okay, so here's a whole bunch of new values. This is a Brene Brown slide. So, but if you're like, what values do I bring if they aren't church values? Here's some. You can use any of these to find the one-to-one. Like, okay, you're really passionate about sustainability. Wow, let's see how that translates. So any of these values, you can get to aligning self-interest, I think, particularly for those of us who have the gift of gab or the preach. So this was when I was like, oh, this is Darcy's art, but this was one of the things that they pulled out in the midst of it. Organizing is what happens when we start to point the gathering forces of Christian relationship towards the aches and pains in the collective whole. We already know how to do this. So this is the place where I want to invite you to make a commitment. Like, what are you going to do with this? Who is the person you can have a conversation with? What's the gathering you can pull together to address the real needs of what we will continue to see as no, as things start to shift, as the social fabric that we've depended upon for decades in this place shifts beyond recognition. The church is one of these places where we can continue to meet the basic needs of our people and organize for what happens next. And it's hyper local. It's hyper local. We're already doing that. So I want to conclude with like a couple more, just a couple more pieces from this chapter that, when I reread it, I was like, oh, that's good. And then if either of you have any questions or you want me to attend to any of this, I'm happy to do so. Oh, okay. Because rural organizing felt so different than the stories of organizing I had access to, I didn't know how to connect to them. Rural organizing is the quiet slumber of relationships built over decades of showing up for people in projects with challenge and joy. Rural organizing is a giant, scarred with pockets of poverty and pain and inextricably connected to the land through the economies that employ the majority of households. Rural organizing is knowing who has what shift at the family bar on the corner and which night the potluck at the church every month where there's free babysitting. Rural organizing is knowing when your kids' best friends are the neighbors no one particularly likes and you have to take a deep breath and bring a thank you side dish and snack over for the sleepover. And yet when it comes down to it, those neighbors are the most trustworthy with your own kid. Rural organizing is all about the relationships between people who are radically different and inextricably connected in ways that some might call mutual aid. And I think that the barrier between rural organizing and the work of movement organizations that prioritize ballot issues and revolutionary causes is often the language we use to speak about it, not the actions which we are all demonstrating. Okay, and okay. Here's the thing I really hope you take from here. And this will be the last piece I read aloud. Pastoring is organizing. Church lay leaders are organizers. Ministry is an organized effort. And the worthiness of the work that happens in your context towards the collective good is translatable when lifting attention from the symptoms to the sources. There's a particular kind of rugged stubbornness connected with faith. I mean, we carry on in limping institutions because we believe there's something worth gathering for. We have 40 hours collective worth of meeting conversations for a 2-hour event. We gather digitally or in dingy basements or in the frozen aisle of the supermarket in the town over because it matters when we pause to have a conversation and say, how are you? And what's new with your world? Even and especially when it feels awkward on leaving and no one really got it right, but we all still tried. So that's what I hope you take from this. It feels awkward. No one's really going to get it right, but trying is the thing that we do because of our faith. And it is because of our faith, it is because of my faith that I have enough left in this well to pull up and continue to do this ongoing slow work of connecting across difference and loving my neighbor and teaching that in the world. So thank you for coming to this presentation. What questions might you have by way of conclusion?
Chris, I have a couple of questions, and some of it you leaned a little bit toward, and in particularly that second to last reading. Um, I think my first question is, I agree with you, and I acknowledge that what we do in small towns, rural towns, is organizing in ways that people don't often even realize that they're organizing. And when you ask somebody about organizing, you're going to get that, oh, it's the demonstration at the Capitol, it's the, the this, or, those big kind of events. How do we help our folks in our rural churches, of which a high percentage of our churches are, understand A, that what they're doing is organizing, but also how important it is to the overall fabric of change? That's my first question.
I mean, I think it's the backbone.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about, hold on. So the purpose of a protest is not to change the government. The purpose of the protest is to educate the people. That's already happening in small towns. It's already happening through our congregations. And beyond that, people who don't have food, who don't have a place to sleep because they can't get one, and who aren't able to really be attentive to the wider world aren't going to be able to do anything. I mean, sure, to some degree, yes. And if people are caught in a poverty system that eats them up, chews them out, and spits them up, like they won't be able to show up in DC for a major event.
Right.
What they can, what we and they can do is be gentle with one another, validate that they are a beloved child of God, and that we have a responsibility to each other in order that we carry on. I mean, mutual aid, as it got all the hype in 2020, but it's also what we've been doing this whole time, right? Who doesn't have a free box in the narthex? Like somebody take this. That's a kind of mutual aid. Or the how conversations are popping up with like I'm thinking about up in Vermont the saying of like you use it like you don't just like throw something away, you fix it, you use it, you repurpose it, all of that. When there's less stuff, um that kind of mutual aid. I mean, one of the things a church could do in order to inspire this kind of network, this backbone of how we show up with one another, is something like a repair cafe.
Mm.
How many people in churches have these skills? I mean, Kim and you and I were talking about sewing before, because I made this quilt behind me. But like, how many people have these skills? And if you just put flyers up all over the place that says like we're gonna darn, we're gonna sew, we're gonna have, all of these things, bring what's broken. Let's fix it together. Okay, there's a metaphor. Like, it's almost like it's the work we do. That matters so much. And it's also like I'm thinking about in our history, in again, it's hyper local. Somebody's house burns down. What happens? Doesn't matter what your background is. They're your neighbor. You show up. What do you need? What do I have? What's going on here? That fabric is the work.
Yeah.
And finally, I think that the barrier that we, the left, and I'm putting myself in that category on purpose, have created is a language barrier. You get it right or you're out. And that doesn't serve any of us. It
Right.
doesn't. We all will get it wrong, all of us. And we have a model of getting it wrong and staying in relationship because of our faith. We have to bring that into all of the places where we are. And be gentle, particularly with those who are reactive to things because they've been like, bloop. shut down in the past. Now, ironically, I think that this is an invitation for us to be attentive to underrepresented communities in emotional space. For example, older white men.
Mm,
Like, and I don't mean that in any dismissive way, but in a way of like how we have shown up, have put people in places where they feel like they can't. And we
mm,
actually need everybody in this work. We need everybody in this work.
yeah.
The last thing I'll say that's vaguely on topic at this point, but forgive me, is that I think that the role of our churches right now is to help onboard and offboard people from a nationalist perspective, a Christian nationalist perspective, when they begin to see the between actions of um, dissonance between the actions of what's happening and the words of Jesus Christ.
Mm,
Because I'm a follower of Jesus. And I think that Jesus is going to come for these lost sheep. Who's going to catch them and say, yeah, yeah, you done did it. But we're right here with you. You're still welcome. Let's deconstruct, invite into a different way, take a deep breath, and let's do the work.
mm.
I think that's a lot of what we can do. And I think, I would be, I think we're going to see that popping up in various different places. I assume it's there already.
Awesome. One of the one of the things that I see um in the differences, I'll call them the differences, even though there are more similarities than differences between rural organizing, small town organizing, and urban organizing, is often in urban or big town or organizing events, opportunities, explorations, it is issue first.
Hmm.
In small towns and rural towns, of which I grew up around several of those, um, it's personal first.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean that in in the urban area it's not personal, or that in the rural area and it's not issue related, but the personal is like the first layer in the small
Yeah.
town and rural setting. And that has both great power, but it also has great vulnerability.
Yeah.
Um, so I would love to hear your reflections on on how folks can both utilize it being that personal space first, and how they can overcome the fears that come with the vulnerability around that.
Hmm. I think it's true of both. But I think that urban has more concentration of people.
Hmm.
So but and relationship is a currency of change. So
Hmm.
to me, that's about the personal first. And I think we can use storytelling. Sometimes if we're not ready to tell our own stories, there's a way in which those stories can be introduced in an echo, whether through media or through podcast or through storytellers, frankly, of like, this is the experience that I had or that I have as someone who is whatever that issue is. And there's some movement strategists will seek storytellers to kind of help amplify that work, but it's always going to happen in the conversations, right? Like, one does not walk into a movement and say, I should lead this. One is onboarded via relationship, saying, hey, come with this to me. And one shows up with not a lot of awareness about what it is, but one learns via relationship, and time to get to a place where you're then able to do something that comes thereafter.
Hmm.
And the last thing I'll say is that I think that this opportunity of um, there's a coalitioning means I'll show up for your stuff, you show up for my stuff, and we show up for each other. A friend asks for help, you help them. Um, a friend asks for help, you help them. And that kind of opportunity is, I think, critical, and somebody's got to take the first step.
Hmm.
And I think in so many ways, there's a fear-based mentality about that first step between rural and urban. And again, I think this is a place where conferences, where we as people who already have folks in relationship across that divide are able to do some of that.
Davy, did you have any questions?
I don't know what my question is in this, but it struck me, Chris, in your presentation on that balance when the only industry in town is the thing that needs changing and organizing around. So
Yeah.
it really struck
Like,
me when
what
I
if it
saw
is the
the
prison?
right, when it is the prison or it is the factory that everybody works at that is making everybody sick. But that no, the Free the Prisoner and Lumpkin, Georgia popped into mind with the ICE detention center.
Yeah.
Like that balance on everybody in town's livelihood is around this thing and it's
Yeah.
against our value. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know what the question is in there, but I'm sitting with that at the moment.
I think it's so important. I mean, I think that sitting is something that we will wrestle with as a society.
Mhm.
You know, there's that is I don't want to even focus on that as the problem because I think we're all in it right now. Like, so when we micro down, we make a particular group of people feel like they're the only ones doing it wrong. When if you scroll all the way out, like we all have something to think about.
Yeah.
There is no ethical consumption under capitalism. And it is our work to show up for each other, to be tender with each other, to hold the line that loving your neighbor is worth doing, and to do so with grace, with forgiveness, with intention, in whatever ways we can. This will crumble. The prisons will fall. I believe the prisons will fall. I believe that as part of my faith. May I see it in my lifetime? I don't know. But that's faith. So like I also will say that there is some incredible organizing happening in the South. If you're white folks doing organizing, I want to just like let you know that a good place to start is somewhere like Surge, showing up for racial justice. I have also learned a lot through the Catalyst program, which was it's like white folks organizing for change and how to do so, particularly with a class where poor and working class folk are on the front. So just naming some of those resources is things you can Google, the Catalyst Collective or showing up for racial justice and probably find an entry point. Um, and community. It can feel deeply lonely when you're in a place of cognitive dissonance, when you're the only one who thinks a particular kind of way, when you feel like your values are really clear, but there are no opportunities to do something different. Like that's a lonely, lonely place. And I think it's imperative for me to say this during Lent. Jesus is with you in that place. Jesus was killed by the state. We know what happens on Sunday morning, and the empire still was there.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for being with us. Thank you for digging deep and writing the way you did, and for being part of this collective wisdom that is shared in building up a new world. Um, Thank you for pointing out. I think something that is key for us to hear is that the stability and the strength in holding on to the good and the just pieces is going to be in the small towns, the rural settings, those places that people often think are so untouched. Um, there's a benefit to that as well because the real sense of organizing and justice show up there. So thank you for all of that and for being with us this evening. I appreciate you, and we look forward to hearing more.
So go forth from this recording to meet your neighbors.
Amen. Thank you.